Chapter 41, Program Music and the Program Symphony. I love this chapter mainly because it deals with a piece that I'm just incredibly fond of, Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. We'll get to that in a minute. But the program symphony and the program music that was so popular of the Romantic era, think about it. If composers are super into telling their own personal stories, then why not create a personal story as a piece of music, right? But just not having the words. And that's kind of what this is. Remember, we've looked at program music before, all the way back in the Baroque era, Vivaldi and his Four Seasons. There was an extra musical element to those pieces, right? Those poems about each season that he even included in the notation, in the music that he printed. He put those lines of text, and you could hear the birds chirping and the little babbling brooks and all of those things. Well, Berlioz takes this one step further with his program symphony, very similar to Beethoven and his cyclic symphony, the Fifth Symphony, where you have the bum 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 that's in every single movement. Berlioz creates a central theme that connects all five movements of his Symphonie Fantastique, right? And he calls that main theme his idée fixe, or in English, a fixed idea, an obsession that burrows into his brain. We might call it an earworm by today's standards. He takes one tune, changes it up a little bit, but you hear it in different versions in every single melody and every single movement, and it kind of helps tell the story. That's the other part of this symphony. There is a very direct and clear program or narrative that Berlioz himself wrote, and it's somewhat autobiographical. Here's how it is, or here's how it works. First movement, it's called Reveries, Passions. Remember that word passion, right? Basically, the artist in Berlioz's talking, right, or in his program notes, which might as well be him, is in love with someone. He's got dreams of having a relationship and what their life might be. He's crushing, and he's crushing hard, right? And so that's what the first movement is all about, is these dreams, these passions, these kinds of lovesick imaginings about this girl that he's crushing on, right? And so you hear the idée fixe, which is meant to represent his beloved, right? The girl, the crush, right? So you hear the idée fixe. It's beautiful, it's sweet, and it sounds longing, right? In the second movement, it's called a ball, as in a fancy dinner party. And basically what happens is the artist sees the crush across the hall, goes over and asks her to dance, and she says, deuces, not interested, get away from me. He's crushed. And then the third movement. He goes out into the countryside to deal with his pain. He sits under a gorgeous oak tree in the middle of a field. He gets out his opium pipe and smokes some dope and gets super high. And then he has a dream, a drug-induced dream, that he kills her because if she won't be his, she won't be anybody's. Little stalkery, right? Things get really dark really fast. Right? Instead of this pastoral scene, now he's high and killing the girl. All in his mind, of course. The fourth movement, which you'll listen to in this chapter, is called the March to the Scaffold. He's murdered the girl, he's now been captured, and now he's having to walk through the middle of the village to the executioner's block, right? Where he's going to lose his head, right? The guillotine. It is French, after all. And what's amazing is in the music, you actually hear the bump, bump, bump of his head bouncing down the steps after he loses it. One other thing to listen for is it's got this kind of victorious march, right? Everybody's happy that they've caught this criminal, right? Right before he loses his head, the music drops out, gets still for a second, and for just a split second, you hear that idée fixe, the beloved. He thinks about the girl, and then it's interrupted by the axe blade. He loses his head, bump, 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 right? So it's like the last thing he hears or he thinks about before he dies. Then it gets even darker and more weird. The fifth movement, which is also in this chapter, the witch's Sabbath. Sabbath as in holy day, except in this case it's not in a church. It's demons. Truly, demons, witches. The devil himself shows up and has a little kicky dance around his grave, right? Kind of dark. What's also interesting is he juxtaposes this kind of satanic, evil, demonic imagery with a very old, famous tune, the Dies Irae from the Requiem, the Mass, right? Not the same tune as Mozart's Dies Irae, but it's the same idea. This is a tune that was an old Gregorian chant from the Middle Ages, that if you were religious, you heard this tune, you knew it meant death. And so he puts that tune in that last movement while witches are dancing and doing all this maniacal stuff around his grave. A really twisted, really dark, really weird piece of music. Also, really beautiful, really fun, really imaginative, and a perfect example of putting your own personal passions, your own personal narrative or soundtrack on display for everyone else to hear and see.